Live from the Glasgow Electric Plant Board, this is Glasgow Wants to Know, with your host, Mr. Uhel Barrickman.
My guest tonight is Wes Davis. We're going to talk about the Appalachian Trail, which he has walked rather recently. But before we get into that, are you a native of Glasgow?
Yes, sir.
Did you go to school here?
Yes, sir. Glasgow High School.
And who are your parents?
My parents are Eddie and Donna Davis.
I know your mother. She's president of the Rotary Club, and I knew her before that also. But I don't know your father. What's he do? My
father works for Lions Company, and he's an estimator and project manager there.
I understand you're a college graduate?
Yes, sir.
Where did you go to college?
I attended the University of Kentucky and received my bachelor's degree in psychology.
And you married or single?
I'm single.
Where do you work now?
I currently work at Philip Gall's Outdoor and Ski in Lexington, Kentucky.
How long you been working there?
I started there around November, about the time I came home from my hike.
Now, just tell the audience, what is the Appalachian Trail?
The Appalachian Trail is what we call a footpath for those who seek fellowship with the wilderness. It's 2,180 miles, give or take a couple, and many people hike it each year for their own goals, or just to get away for a while, or usually it's a transition state in their life between college and work, or between retirement or work and retirement.
When and why did you get the idea to traverse it?
I've always liked the outdoors. Probably the first moment I stepped foot on the Appalachian Trail was when I was about in 7th or 8th grade. I went on a church backpacking trip for a week on the Appalachian Trail in Virginia, and after that I became very interested in the idea of the trail, and through the years started hiking and backpacking a little bit more, and decided that it would be a great thing to do after having finished my college career.
Now, insofar as the backpacking is concerned, what size pack did you have insofar as the trail was concerned?
There's many different many different theories upon how much to carry and how much weight to carry and what to carry, and I kind of live by the go light philosophy. My backpack was merely an oversized day pack, and my normal pack weight was around 25 pounds with food and water for the next 4 or 5 days.
Now, is the trail marked, and if so, how?
Yes, the trail is continuously, it's actually the longest continuously marked footpath. It's marked by a white blaze, which is usually put on trees for the most part, or sometimes on rocks in above tree line environments. And there's a blaze approximately every, I don't know, say 50 yards or so, depending on the area. It's a heavily traveled trail and very well marked for the most part.
How wide is it?
The trail, and for the most part, it's wide enough for one person to walk feasibly without hitting anything, although there are some areas that may not have been maintained as well as others, where nature kind of takes its course on that environment.
So I take it that the trail itself is clear.
Yes, sir. It's very, very well traveled, and except for a few places, it's not very hard to know exactly that you're on the Appalachian Trail.
Now, other than the markers on the trail, did you take maps or anything of that nature?
Yes, I decided to take the maps for each section of the trail. Usually the maps are in order by state, or in states such as Virginia, maybe 4 sections of Virginia, there's 4 sections of maps. And the maps were helpful, one in that it showed where the towns were off the trail, and also they had elevation profiles that allowed you to kind of get an idea of what the next day ahead looks like, and how far you might be able to travel, and which shelter to stay at as well.
Now you're talking about shelters. How far apart were the shelters, generally?
Generally the shelters were about 7 or 8 miles apart. Most days I would start at one shelter and pass 2 and stay at the 3rd for the most part.
Now obviously there's a northern entrance and a southern entrance to the trail. Which one did you take?
I decided to start at Mount Katahdin in Maine and finish at Springer Mountain in Georgia. Most people, about 90% of the hikers, start in Springer Mountain and go to Mount Katahdin because you're walking with the seasons change. The reason I opted for the route I took is I was currently enrolled in a class that didn't end until late May, and Mount Katahdin closes October 15th, so I didn't want to be rushed in order to get to Mount Katahdin before fall and winter set in.
And how did you get to the starting point?
My father and I, my father drove me up to Maine on May 24th, and it took us 2 days to drive up there, and he and I hiked up to Mount Katahdin together and back down on that day, and the next day is when I started into the 100-mile wilderness.
Now I believe you have a picture of the starting point.
Right.
Can we show that?
This is a picture on top of Mount Katahdin. Fortunately, we had a great day. It was fairly clear, and the views from up top were spectacular. And the hike up there was definitely challenging, but it was well worth it when you finally reached the top and my starting point for the trail.
How far was it to the top of it from where you stopped in a car?
The top was about 5.2 miles, I believe, from the campground that we stayed at the night before, and it was 5.2 miles uphill for the most part. Mount Katahdin's about 5,000 feet high, and I'm not really sure where we started, but pretty low in elevation.
Now, if I understood you correctly a moment ago, you said your father started with you on the trail?
Yes, sir.
How long did he stay with you?
He just hiked up to Mount Katahdin and back down to the campground, and then he went home, and I started my trip from there.
You already talked about your backpack a little bit, but what all did you have in your backpack when you started?
When I started, I had a sleeping bag and a sleeping pad. I carried a bivy sack, which is a bivouac shelter. It's basically a one-person tent. I carried that in case I couldn't find a shelter or didn't make it to a shelter at the first night. Fortunately, I never had to use that. Carried a stove, lots of food, a headlamp, first aid kit, and that's probably most of what I carried, and one extra set of clothes.
And it weighed about how much?
Everything weighed around 25 pounds.
What kind of stove did you have?
I started out with a stove. It was a isopropane butane canister stove that it was made by Snow Peak, and basically it just involved a small canister of fuel and a stove that screwed onto that canister, and it took about 4 minutes to boil water, and dinner was served.
Well, now, obviously you couldn't carry enough and didn't carry enough food to last you while you traveled the trail. How did you resupply yourself?
Before I started, I bought a book called Planning Through Hike of the Appalachian Trail, which was very helpful, and it actually had pages that listed all of the towns close to the trail and post offices along the trail, and using that I planned out 21 mail drops in which I put enough food to last until the next mail drop, and those I arranged previously at my home, and my parents would mail those to me at each town that was close that I would stay in, and I would pick those up at the post office. You just mail them general delivery, and most of the post offices along the trail understand that that's for a hiker, and they'll hold the packages for 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Now, when you went into these towns along the trail and so forth to pick up stuff that was mailed to you, did you count that? That is the actual distance from the trail into the city. Did you count that as a part of the trail or not?
That's not included in the 2,180 mile estimate, or not estimate, but estimate approximation. That going into town, most of the time I got a ride into town. Only 2 or 3 times I actually had to walk a couple miles into town and back out. For the most part, the people that live around the town understand what you're doing and can tell by not only your look but your smell that you're wanting to get into town and that you're hiking the trail. The ride out of town was usually a lot easier because if you stayed in a hostel or maybe even a small a hotel or something, the people that ran that place would usually give you a ride back to the trail.
Now explain what you mean by a hostel.
The hostels were one of the more unique parts of the trip. Hostels are just usually small houses or kind of like an inn for hikers, made specifically for hikers. The rate was anywhere from $10 to maybe $15 a night, and sometimes they would include a dinner or a breakfast in that and also a shuttle back to the trail. It was usually people that were familiar with the trail and enjoyed hikers coming to stay with them, and for the most part all of the hostels I stayed in were very, very friendly people and very interesting people. And it was a very economical way to go into town and resupply and relax and have the kind of the amenities of a hotel without having to pay a lot of money for that.
And I believe that there were some shelters on the path. I think you have a picture, or we have a picture of that.
This shelter was, it's called Rainbow Stream Shelter. It was the second shelter I stayed at in the 100-mile wilderness in Maine. It was actually, I believe the guidebook said that it was featured in, I believe, 1978 National Geographic magazine. It's just a pretty setting, the stream in front, and you actually cross the 2 logs there to get to the shelter, and it was one of the cooler shelters that I was able to stay in along the way.
Now, other than just the shelter, was anything else in it? In other words, was there a place to put your sleeping bag or anything like that?
The shelter, or lean-to, was basically a 3-sided structure with a roof, as you can see, and then usually it had a raised platform along which you put your sleep where you sleep, and then in this one you can actually see a bag hanging from the top there, and that was where in non-bear country we would hang our food bags in order that rodents, mice and squirrels and raccoons couldn't get to your food.
Did you see any bears in Maine?
I didn't see any bears in Maine. I did see some moose and other wildlife.
Some what?
Moose. I saw moose.
What? Oh, moose.
Mm-hmm.
Grown or young? Or
It was a grown moose.
Male?
That I'm not sure about.
You mentioned a moment ago the 100-mile wilderness. Explain about that.
It's a really unique part of the trail. It's 100 miles of purely trail. There's no hostels or towns or any place to stop, and really not very many access points upon which you could be picked up. And therefore, for me, for northbounders that start in Georgia, it's kind of the last push toward the finish line, Katahdin. But for me, it was kind of I was thrown into the wilderness for 7 days without anything around, or it was very eye-opening to what was ahead, and very beautiful place, and the reason so probably is that it was so secluded, and not very many people you would see there, because there's no real access points to the wilderness through there.
Well, in the wilderness, any spring flowers or so forth in there?
There were a few. We could see some trout, some trillium along the way. One of the cool parts about it were the stream crossings. The mountain water, there was a lot of runoff from the mountains, the snow melting in the mountains, and there were a lot of lakes up there in Maine, and some of the streams we actually had to cross that could be as far as up to waist high. The real disappointing part I want to say about the wilderness was an insect called the black fly, which are tiny biting flies, and through the wilderness, not having any sort of insect repellent, that was really a hard thing to overcome, was the biting flies, and the flies would swarm you while you were hiking or when you stopped. And yeah, we learned to make the smokiest fires imaginable at night to keep the flies from biting you. But that was kind of a miserable part of the wilderness, although it's one of you kind of got used to it after the first couple of days and realized that they can't be around forever. So,
well, now you referred time or two to we. Was somebody else with you as you crossed the?
Sure. I met 4 other guys, and we pretty much stayed together through the wilderness, the 100-mile wilderness. As far as I know, 4 out of 5 of us finished the trail completely, and the other fellow had to go home for family reasons. But it was really nice to actually have some people that were doing the same thing as you were, and especially that in that break-in period, to have some people that were going through the same thing that you were, and experiencing the black flies and the beautiful country ahead.
Can you explain a little more about the beautiful country? Was it all wilderness on this 100-mile?
For the most part, there were quite a few lakes. Actually, one lake I was able to get a picture of a fellow and his son, I presume, in a canoe. That I'm not really sure how they got to the lake because of the limited access points. And then there were also some higher peaks that were climbed in the wilderness, 2 or 3 places where you could get a view of the lake country in Maine, and it was absolutely amazing.
Now, where did you go after you got out of the wilderness?
Right out of the wilderness, basically you go straight into the major mountain ranges in Maine. A lot of elevation gain and loss, and very, very difficult part of the trail lies in southern and central Maine. Probably the first town I stopped in, the first town after the wilderness was actually a little town called Monson, Maine, and I stayed there at a hostel that is really famous on the trail. Had been there several years, called Shaw's, and it was a boarding house, and they'd had, I think the number was over 70,000 hikers had stayed at this hostel because of it being right on the edge of the wilderness.
Over what period of time?
I think they had been there about 50 years.
How long has the trail been in existence?
It's been in existence about the same amount of time. The trail was actually was kind of started in the 30s, and the workings of the trail, but after the 30s and 40s, during the war, it was kind of tossed aside for a while, and all of nature took over, and after the war they decided to make it a project, and finally started cleaning it up more and making it a well-known destination for people.
Do we have tonight any more pictures of Maine and the wilderness than the 2 that have already been shown?
I believe those are the 2 that I have of Maine.
Now, how long did it take you to get through Maine?
It took about 270 miles. I think it took me maybe around a month to get through Maine.
Now, next you came to New Hampshire?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you first find in New Hampshire? What town?
The first town in New Hampshire was Gorham. Gorham, New Hampshire was the first town I stayed in. It's a pretty popular town because of its close vicinity with the White Mountains, and very popular destination for hikers, not only through hikers because the trail traverses through it, but day hikers and weekenders.
And where did you go from there?
Right out of Gorham, I hiked through the White Mountains, and the next picture is of Mount Washington, which is kind of the highlight of that portion of the trail. It's the highest point in New Hampshire, and it also holds the world's record for the highest wind speed. I believe it's around 270 miles an hour. Was the recorded highest wind speed in the history.
Well, there's a train to the top of that. Did you walk it, or did you go on the train?
I actually walked it. You could see the train coming up the hill as you're traversing some of the rocks there, and the granite on the way there. But I did see the train, and it was kind of, you felt like people were cheating when you saw the train. And there's also a auto road that
But that wasn't a part of the trail.
That was not a part of it.
You had just gone over there.
Right.
Where did you encounter a man that you referred to in your journal as Peg Leg?
Peg Leg was actually encountered in Maine before that. It was in a little town in Maine. Andover, Maine was the town, and this gentleman ran a hostel there, and he actually had a wooden leg, and he preferred to be called by Peg Leg. I asked him if there was another name that I could call him, and he preferred to be called Peg Leg. And a really nice guy, and I stayed there for 2 or 3 days, and I was waiting for a new backpack at the time because my backpack had broken, and he allowed me to stay there and do what they call slack packing, which involves basically you just do sections of the trail in a day hike, and I did a couple of days of that with him while I was waiting on my backpack in the mail.
Where is the Notch?
The Mahoosic Notch is a very famous mile of the trail. Many have said that it's the hardest mile on the trail. I tend to disagree with that. I think probably the hardest mile on the trail was on the way to the beginning for me on Mount Katahdin, maybe because of my lack of training or physical condition.
Well, the Notch is in what state?
The Mahoosic Notch is in Maine. It is in southern Maine, and basically it's a huge boulder field, and you can hear water trickling underneath the rocks, and you have to climb up and over rocks to get through this section of the trail. And there's markings on the rock that kind of tell you where to go and which rock to go under and which rock to go over. But it was really enjoyable, even though a lot of people didn't like it.
Well, let's get on into the rest of New Hampshire.
Sure.
What else did you encounter in New Hampshire of note, as far as the trail was concerned?
Sure. New Hampshire, the White Mountains I'd mentioned, there's probably the big part. Another huge mountain, Mount Moosilauke, was actually one of the last mountains I hiked over, and before I got to Hanover, New Hampshire, which was the home of Dartmouth College. And Hanover is actually a true trail town, in which the trail goes straight through the center of town. It's a really neat college town, and I stayed there for a couple days and enjoyed.
Did you meet any good-looking co-eds while you were there?
At the time I was going through, summer school was in session, so I did not necessarily encounter as many as possible, I guess you would say.
You also, while you were in New Hampshire, then you got out of it some over into Vermont and then back to New Hampshire. Is that right?
I actually believe the trail goes from New Hampshire straight to Vermont, and then it stays in Vermont until you hit Massachusetts.
Now, you got any pictures along there?
Let's see. Actually, my next picture that I picked is the next one's in New York, so I'll try to go through verbally what happened between. In Vermont, I had a really neat experience. I'll let you know about. It was on the 4th of July. I had just hiked over Killington Mountain, which is a pretty popular ski destination in the Northeast, and I came down to a little town called Rutland, and I was hitchhiking into town for something to celebrate the 4th of July, and at this point I was picked up by a younger couple that turns out asked me if I would like to go to a concert in New York, which they were going to, and having nothing to do but hike and celebrate, I took them up on the offer and went down there and spent the night, and they brought me back to Vermont and showed me around. The girl was from Vermont, and so I was able to experience some things off the trail in that area of Vermont, and then they took me back to the trail to continue on.
Now, when you got into Massachusetts, which was the first town you encountered there?
The first town in Massachusetts, what I believe that I stopped in was Cheshire, which was really neat place, only because my friend from town, Bhavani Modi, was there to pick me up. She was going to school in Amherst, about an hour and a half away, and I graduated high school with Bhavani, and I spent 3 or 4 days with her back in where she lived, and was able to take some time off the trail and enjoy. We stayed in her town, and it was really neat town. And also, she was nice enough to take me to Boston, which I'd never been to before, and we had a great time there. We did an abridged version, or shall I say her version, of the Freedom Trail, which takes you past many historic landmarks, and I was able to see where Cheers was located, and some statues of Samuel Adams and the like, and places like famous places like Quincy Market and those sorts of things, and had a really good time in Boston. Was able to see the city for a day, and I really thank her for that opportunity, and also just it was really nice break from the trail.
And then, where did you go from? You went back to the trail.
Right.
Now, did anything happen from where you got back to the trail of interest until you got into Connecticut?
Most of Massachusetts was not very challenging as far as elevation gain and loss. A very cool place that I got to see was the highest point in Massachusetts, Mount Greylock, which was actually before I was picked up from her. I'd forgotten about that, but there's a tower up there, and it's a really nice place. After that, there were a couple places I stayed. One was a cabin. It was called Upper Goose Pond Cabin, which is kind of a secret on the trail, and it's made for through hikers, and they kind of get upset when weekenders or day hikers take advantage of what it has to offer, because it's really unique in that it has a caretaker, and it's a cabin that's situated on a pond, and the caretaker has to paddle across the pond each day to get all of the water that's needed to run the cabin. And usually the caretaker is someone really involved with the trail, or even the fellow that I had actually hiked the trail before. And it was nice. They had bunks, and in the morning the caretaker would fix coffee and pancakes for all of the hikers, and the donation was $3 donation was suggested. So it was a really nice place right off the trail to stay and get to talk to some other hikers and share stories with.
I believe you have a picture there of it was taken in Boston.
No, I didn't bring. Bring one.
What is that picture?
This one's for the train station in New York City.
In New York.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we get to New York shortly.
Okay.
Now, what about Connecticut?
Connecticut was another kind of a short state to hike through. Some interesting little towns, very expensive, I might add. Kent, Connecticut. I stayed there one night, along with I stopped in a quaint little town, Salisbury, which was very expensive, kind of a retirement community, it seemed. The trail through Connecticut was kind of bland. There wasn't a whole lot of elevation change or views, really. It was a lot of field walking, and it wasn't my favorite state, but it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was the worst state either. It was.
What about New York?
New York was kind of an interesting state. I'd never been to the Northeast, so thinking, oh, New York, it's going to be cities and roads and nothing wilderness, but it was actually turned out that New York had a lot to offer. There's a Bear Mountain State Park, which is kind of a refuge for those who live in the city, and noticeably so. Very crowded when I walked through there, and also I got an opportunity to take a train in directly off the trail to Grand Central Station in New York City, and the next picture is of the Appalachian Trail train platform, I guess you would say, where the commuter train stops only on Saturdays to go in, Saturdays and Sundays to go into the city. So I was able to, I planned it out accordingly and was able to stop and go into New York City. It was kind of bewildering at first, going from the wilderness to the largest city on the East Coast. The first thing I thought, well, I've been using maps in order to get me where I'll go, so maybe I should get a map to figure out where I'm going to go in Manhattan. And so I got a map and asked a few people if there was a hostel or a place I could stay in the city, and I was able to find a hostel. It was only about 23 blocks away after a 18-mile hike to the train station, but I made it to a hostel that night, and was pretty tired by that point.
Then you went into New Jersey after
Right.
New York City. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything of interest there?
New Jersey, I kind of had the same feeling as I did New York, and interestingly enough, the wilderness there was beautiful. I did experience my first bear in New Jersey. It was a mother, and 2 cubs, and I looked off. I actually hit a log with my foot, and I looked, and I heard some noise off in the distance, and I looked over, and sure enough, it was 3 bears, and they looked at me, and the 2 cubs climbed up a tree as fast as you could imagine, and the mom stood there and kind of eyed me down, and the cubs came down from the tree, and then they all ran off. I basically they were scared of me more than they just didn't want me to bother them, and I thought, well, I know now what they do. And these were black bears, of course. I think the situation might have been a little different had it been a grizzly bear, but thank goodness there's none on the trail that are known anyway.
Then you got into Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Pennsylvania was probably my least favorite state, in that trail-wise it was very rocky, and a lot of hikers complain about that. The rock, and it's not just big boulders necessarily, as it's just tiny rocks that cover the pathway, and so you tend to hurt your ankles and cut your feet up, and you're off balance most of the time while you're hiking. The only redeeming part of the trail in Pennsylvania, I would have to say, were the trail towns. They were very small towns, but they were, the people in the towns were hospitable and very nice to hikers. My next picture is actually taken in Pennsylvania. This picture was taken right after I had stepped over the rock there. It's a picture of a rattlesnake. I stepped over the rock and immediately heard the snake rattle, and I looked down and I saw him there, and I thought, well, I'll take a picture and then I'll leave as soon as possible. But Pennsylvania was there were a lot of snakes. They probably encountered the most snakes there by nature of the rocks that we climbed over. Rattlesnakes and copperheads were prominent in that area too.
Both of them very poisonous.
Right.
And then you got into Maryland. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Got any comments or pictures about Maryland?
Well, the Pennsylvania, my next picture was actually in Pennsylvania as well, really close to Maryland. There's a place called Pine Grove Furnace State Park, and this is kind of marks the halfway point of the trail, and it's through hiker tradition to eat a half-gallon of ice cream in one sitting when you reach this milestone. So the next picture was actually of my empty half-gallon of ice cream. I opted for the vanilla chocolate mix. I thought I might get tired of one during that little incident, but
I like ice cream, but I don't think I could eat a half-gallon in one sitting.
Getting to Maryland, I guess Maryland is the second to shortest state on the trail mileage-wise. It's there's a lot of rocks in early Maryland, and then it kind of flattens out and it begins to be more. You come upon more views, and it's not as much of a ridgeline walk. The big town in Maryland, or the big place, well, it's right on the border of Maryland, West Virginia, which West Virginia, the trail only goes about 10 miles through West Virginia, was Harper's Ferry, which is a pretty famous place historically, and that was the first opportunity for me to meet my parents in Harper's Ferry, and we had a really good time together, and I was able to take them through the town, which is another trail town that the trail actually goes through and hits kind of the historical points along its way.
And then from there you got into Virginia.
Yes. Virginia is the longest state mileage-wise on the trail, consisting of a fourth of the whole trail. Virginia has that many miles, a fourth of the whole mileage, and one of the nicer spots on the trail in Virginia was Shenandoah National Park, which is about 102 miles long, that the trail goes entirely through the middle of the park. Very nice area with nice views, wildlife, and then traveling down to more central southern Virginia. My next picture was at a place called McAfee Knob. It's a pretty famous place on the trail where hikers, you hike up to this ledge here, and overlooking in the distance you can actually see Roanoke, Virginia.
How far is Roanoke from that, approximately?
It's probably about 30 miles from there. It's from the trail, before you get to this point, there's a town that I stopped in which they said you could get there in about around 30 miles.
We're going to have to move along here. It's about 12 minutes.
All right.
Anything else about Virginia?
The next picture is actually it's a picture of a hostel in Virginia, in the kind of the southernmost town in Virginia. This hostel was called The Place, and it was run by the Methodist Church there. Very famous town. It's actually where they host trail days every year in Damascus. That marks the southern point of Virginia, which brings us to Tennessee. Probably the one of the cooler states, in that I've done some hiking. Probably most of my hiking I've done in Tennessee and in the Smoky Mountains. Not to skip the northern part of Tennessee, but the Smokies are a very unique place, and the next picture I have is actually in the Smokies. And my highlight of the trail, or one of the major highlights, was this section, because my father met me at the beginning of the Smokies and hiked the 70 miles of the trail through the Smokies with me. So it was kind of a neat period for me, and I was getting close to the end, and my dad and I have always hiked together, and we had a great time, and he proved to be very well fit for this section of the trail, and I was proud of him when we made it to the end there in Fontana Dam, and his boss picked us up there, and we spent the day with them in Fontana Village.
So you were surprised that he could navigate the trail as well as he could, huh? Physically?
Well, yes. there's the Smokies section of the trail is pretty brutal, especially the first ascent is a large elevation gain, and then followed by some other elevation gains. One notably the Klingman's Dome, which is the highest point on the whole trail, and that was an interesting spot in which I'd already been before, but it was a little different this time, on a different journey.
How far can you see could you see from that?
The day we were at Klingman's Dome, it was a little overcast. You could see quite a ways. Some other spots we were able to see far, like a pretty good distance from, was actually one place in particular called Rocky Top, which happens to be the place where the song, the state song, was named after this specific place. So it was kind of interesting to be there and get a view from up there.
And what's your next picture?
That's the end. So
that's the end. We'll get to that in a minute, or two, or three. I believe you saw some bears in the Smokies.
Mm-hmm.
One or more?
I think it's. Have we gone to that picture? Okay, yeah. This picture is of a bear seen in the Smokies. I was able to get a picture of one. I believe there were two others at the time, and they did the same thing as the bears in New Jersey. They scurried up the tree really quick and then came down and looked at us, and then decided to move on. This happened to be a funny moment in that there were two Frenchmen that were hiking along with us, and they had spotted the bears, and they looked, and we were behind them, and they told us to be quiet, and what's going on? And we caught up to them, and they were looking over there, and both of them had obtained these big sticks to ward off the bears. They were scared, and they didn't know what to do. And I said, "Oh, it's okay." I said, "They won't hurt you." And so Dad and I hiked on ahead of them, and they said, "Okay, well, we'll go." And then we spotted them again, and they left us alone and went about their business. It was kind of funny to see two people that were kind of new at the whole bear thing, and they were scared. And I was pretty scared the first time I saw one too, so I don't blame them.
You understood it,
right?
Then you got into Georgia.
Georgia was a nice enough place. For me, it was I could see the end, and I was excited and sort of emotional, and on both sides. Excited, and then in another way, kind of bummed that this whole journey is going to come to an end. It's interesting that for me, Georgia was not a hard state, but since 90% of the hikers start in Georgia, they claim that it's very, very difficult terrain, and there's a lot of ups and downs, and it's a hard point of the trail for them because they're just starting. But for me, it was more of a well, there's a few more miles to go, and I can make it. And it was a beautiful state, and I was glad to be in that far south.
Where did it end in Georgia?
The ending is my last picture in Springer Mountain, Georgia. It's really kind of anticlimactic in a way to end there, as opposed to Mount Katahdin, which was so much higher with a beautiful view. Springer Mountain happened to be pretty exciting for me, though, since this was the end of this 5.5 month long journey. The people were already there, and I got there and I touched the sign and I yelled really loud, and they said that's the way we felt too, and I kind of thought, well, I don't think you understand, and they asked me some questions and realized what I'd done, and they were just really excited for me as well, and it was kind of an exciting time for everyone that was up there at the time.
What town is that near that we might know?
The last town that I stayed in was Hiawassee. Not so familiar, but Springer Mountain's actually about an hour and a half to 2 hours north of Atlanta. So just to give you kind of an idea of where it was located, I was able to, one of my friends, he and his dad picked me up there, and his dad lived in Atlanta, so I spent the weekend with him in Atlanta. So that was also a kind of a neat experience as well.
Well, in making the trail, you also went to 3 very large cities.
That's right.
Boston, New York, and then Atlanta.
Right.
Which did you enjoy the most? The cities or the trail?
Definitely. The trail I enjoy the most. Since it is a footpath for those who seek wilderness, you know, it was nice, but I was happy to be able to go into the cities and see the Northeast that I'd never seen before. I'm very I feel very fortunate for this experience.
Would you do it again?
I wouldn't do the Appalachian Trail in its entirety in one trip again. I'll definitely do sections and maybe another long distance trail in the future, such as the Pacific Crest or the Continental Divide in the western part of the United States.
You're really into it, aren't you?
I do love the outdoors.
Somewhere or other in the material that your mother furnished me, there's reference that you're going to write a book on the psychology of backpacking. You still intend to do that?
That may be a little bit more of a long-term goal, but I think it would be an interesting project to develop and think about it. It was sort of said off the cuff jokingly at the time, but I think there are some parallels between the two fields.
And do you intend to continue your education, and in what field?
Yes, I've actually kind of changed career paths a little bit. I sort of intended on doing something along the lines of school psychology, but with this experience and some other things falling in place, I'm looking to get my master's in adventure education and try to show people the skills that I know and have obtained in the outdoors and teach others those, and also help others with maybe mental disorders or other types of problems such as that.
Where do you intend to get your major?
The program that I'm looking at currently is in Prescott College in Arizona, in Prescott, Arizona.
We've just about covered it.
All right.
You've done a good job. I've enjoyed it. And nice of you to share with us your experiences. Maybe you talk to somebody else wanting to do it sometime. I don't know. But
Sure.
If so, they'll know whom to see to find out about it.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. And good luck to you.
Thanks.